Before the labors, before the lion skin, before any of it, Hercules was a husband and a father sitting in his own home. Then Hera sent madness into his mind, and he killed his wife and children with his own hands without knowing what he was doing. The 12 labors were penance. The strongest man who ever lived spent the most famous chapter of his life trying to pay for something he could never take back. Hercules, known in Greek as Heracles, is the most famous hero in classical mythology. His story is preserved in sources from Euripides to Apollodorus. The 12 labors form the heart of that biography, but the story is considerably darker and more human than the popular version suggests. What's worth understanding from the start is that Hercules was not simply good. He was powerful, courageous, and capable of great kindness, but he was also impulsive, prone to rage, and repeatedly caused harm to people around him. The Greeks weren't wrong to find this complicated. They built a hero who was the best and worst of human nature simultaneously scaled up to divine proportions. If you want the full Greek mythology series, subscribe to Snapode Myths and hit the bell. Like this video if you want more, and let's get into the real story of Hercules. Hercules was the son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal woman. Zeus disguised himself as her husband and visited her. The result was Hercules, whose strength was apparent from infancy. Hera sent 2 serpents to kill the infant in his crib. The baby strangled them both, one in each fist. Hercules grew to extraordinary size and strength, trained by the finest teachers in Greece. He married Megara, daughter of the king of Thebes, and they had children. This was a period of genuine happiness. He had built a family, a home, a life outside of divine politics. That is when Hera chose to destroy it. Hera afflicted Hercules with madness so complete that he could not distinguish his enemies from his family. In his deluded state he saw monsters, and he killed Megara and their children, believing he was fighting enemies of Thebes. When the madness lifted and he saw what he had done, the grief was absolute. That's what makes the madness so devastating as a story device. The worst thing Hercules ever did was not a choice. The oracle at Delphi told him he must go to his cousin Eurystheus and perform whatever tasks were assigned. Completing these would purify him and eventually earn him a place among the gods. Eurystheus was a weak, frightened man who had always envied Hercules. He and Hera designed the labors specifically to be impossible. The first labor was the Nemean lion, whose golden hide was impervious to all weapons. Hercules tracked it to its cave, blocked one entrance, and drove it into the other. When weapons were useless, he wrestled it to death with his bare hands, then used its own claws to skin it. He wore that skin for the rest of his life. The second labor was the Lernaean Hydra, a water serpent where cutting off one head caused 2 more to grow. Hercules solved this by having his nephew cauterize each stump with a torch immediately after decapitation. He dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood, which would cause serious problems later. Eurystheus disqualified both of these. He ruled the lion didn't count because Hercules used his hands, and the Hydra didn't count because his nephew helped. The third labor was the Cyrenian Hind, a golden antler deer sacred to Artemis, which he had to capture alive without harming. He spent an entire year pursuing it. The fourth was the Erymanthian Boar, which he captured and brought back. When he arrived carrying it, Eurystheus was so terrified he hid in a large bronze jar buried in the ground. The fifth was the Augean stables, which had not been cleaned in 30 years. Hercules redirected to rivers through them in a single day. Eurystheus disqualified this one too, on the grounds that Hercules had been offered payment. The sixth was the Stymphalian birds, man-eating bronze-feathered birds. He used bronze castanets from Athena to startle them into the air, then shot them down. The seventh sent him to Crete to capture the Cretan bull, the same bull that had fathered the Minotaur. The eighth took him to Thrace for the man-eating mares of Diomedes, horses fed on human flesh by their owner King Diomedes. Hercules fed Diomedes to his own horses, after which they became tame. The ninth labor involves Hera directly interfering, which she does with great enthusiasm. It required the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Hippolyta was willing to give it to Hercules simply because he asked. Hera disguised herself as an Amazon and spread the rumor that Hercules planned to kidnap the queen. A battle broke out. Hercules killed Hippolyta in the confusion, took the girdle, and left. The 10th labor is where things get genuinely epic in scale. Hercules had to steal the cattle of Geryon, a 3-bodied giant at the far western edge of the world. To get there, he sailed in a golden cup borrowed from the sun god Helios. He fought and killed the giant's 2-headed dog, his herdsman, then Geryon himself. The 11th labor sent Hercules to retrieve 3 golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. The garden was guarded by a 100-headed dragon. Hercules found Atlas, the Titan, holding up the sky, and proposed an exchange. Hercules would take the sky while Atlas retrieved the apples. Atlas came back with a new idea. He would deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself, and Hercules could keep holding the sky permanently. Hercules agreed, then asked Atlas to take the sky back, just for a moment while he adjusted his shoulder pad. As soon as Atlas's hands were back on the sky, Hercules picked up the apples and walked away. The 12th and final labor was the one supposed to be impossible above all others. Bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed dog guarding the underworld, without using weapons. Hercules went down into the land of the dead alive. He found Hades and asked permission. Hades said he could take Cerberus if he could subdue him without weapons. Hercules grabbed all 3 heads, held on through the thrashing, and carried him to the surface. The 12 labors were not the whole story. Between and around them, Hercules participated in the Argonaut expedition, sacked Troy decades before the Trojan War, fought giants alongside the gods, and had numerous other adventures. He also made serious mistakes, killing his music teacher, killing his friend Iphitus in rage, and using his strength in ways that caused unintended harm. One significant episode was his marriage to Hera. To win her, he wrestled the river god Hercules, ultimately winning when he grabbed and broke off one of the god's horns in bull form. While traveling with her, the centaur Nessus attempted to assault her. Hercules shot him with a Hydra poisoned arrow. As Nessus lay dying, he told Hera to collect his blood, claiming it would serve as a love charm. It was a lie designed for revenge. Years later, when Hera worried Hercules was losing interest in her for another woman, she remembered Nessus's gift. She soaked a robe in the centaur's blood and sent it to Hercules. The moment the robe touched his skin, the Hydra's poison in Nessus's blood began to work. It could not be removed. It burned through his flesh with pain, so extreme that Hercules began tearing trees from the earth just to have something to do with the agony. When he learned what had happened, Hera took her own life. Hercules had himself carried to Mount Otay and built his own funeral pyre. No one would light it until a young man named Philoctetes agreed, and in exchange, Hercules gave him his famous bow and poisoned arrows. Hercules climbed onto the pyre as the flames rose. His mortal nature burned away. What was left, the divine part that came from Zeus, ascended to Olympus, where he was reconciled with Hera and made fully immortal. He married Hebe, goddess of youth, and lived among the gods. The man who had suffered more than almost any figure in mythology arrived at last somewhere he could rest. Understanding Hera's persecution requires understanding what Hercules represented to her. He was not simply Zeus's illegitimate son. He was the physical embodiment of everything she could not change about her marriage, the infidelity, the divine favor shown to mortals, the children she could not prevent from existing. What the myth does with this is interesting. It never asks us to see Hera as simply villainous. It asks us to see a figure with real grievances who nevertheless directs them at someone who did not earn them. That's a more honest portrayal of how resentment actually works. Eurystheus is a smaller but equally real kind of villain. He represents authority that instinctively resents competence in others, that invents new rules to disqualify achievement, that wants the powerful person available but never at eye level. He never once faces Hercules directly. He hides in his jar and issues commands and moves the goalposts. Looking at the 12 labors as a whole, a pattern emerges. Hercules almost never defeats adversaries through raw power alone. He redirects rivers, he uses fire, he borrows a golden cup, he tricks Atlas, he asks Hades politely. The labors teach that strength is necessary but never sufficient. The greatest challenges require intelligence, creativity, and knowing when to ask for help. This is why Hercules endured so completely across cultures. The Romans took him as a god of commerce and travelers. His labors were adapted and retold across centuries. The core of the story, enormous capacity for both destruction and achievement combined with a life spent in service as penance, spoke to something universal. The Disney version is a very specific choice. It removes the madness and murder entirely, making the labors an audition for godhood rather than penance. The result is cleaner but less interesting. The ancient Hercules is compelling precisely because he is not simply good. He is powerful, flawed, capable of catastrophic harm, trying to make something right that cannot fully be made right. The psychologist Carl Jung used Hercules as an example of what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we cannot control. Hercules' madness was the shadow breaking through. The labors were the work of integrating that experience, transforming rage and grief into directed action. Ancient philosophers read the 12 labors as allegory for the 12 months of the year, or for the soul's journey through the zodiac. Stoic philosophers embraced Hercules as their exemplary figure, a man who did not choose his suffering but chose how to respond to it. The labors also have a very specific structure that rewards paying attention. They move outward geographically as they progress, from local Greece to Crete to Thrace to the far western edge of the world to the underworld itself. Each one is slightly more impossible than the last. The final labor does not end with fighting a monster. It ends with Hercules standing in the kingdom of the dead, asking the god of death for a favor, and getting it. The arc is not just physical expansion. It is a journey from the world of men to the boundary of the divine, completed on foot and on purpose. Hercules speaks to something very specific in the modern world, the experience of living with something you did that you cannot undo. The labors are not punishment in the simple sense. They are the answer to the question of what you do with the rest of your life after that. You do the work. You do it without complaint. You do it even when the rules keep changing and the person assigning the work is unworthy of your effort. You do it because the work itself is what transforms you, and transformation is the only actual path forward. The story of Hercules teaches us that strength without self-knowledge is dangerous, that the greatest obstacle a powerful person faces is often themselves, and that redemption is not a single moment but a sustained practice of doing the next hard thing. The 12 labors are not proof that Hercules was the strongest man who ever lived. We knew that in the first labor. They are proof that he kept going anyway, through grief and injustice and manipulated failures and divine interference, until he arrived somewhere worthy of what he had endured. That is a harder thing than strength. It is what the Greeks actually admired. This video was created by combining human research and scriptwriting with AI-assisted visual production, bringing these ancient stories to life for modern audiences. For more Greek mythology, related books, and the AI tools we use to make this content, check the links in the description below.